Our case overview today is absolutely heartbreaking. This New Hampshire cold case has gone unsolved for almost 54 years. It takes us back to 1971 in the small town of Franklin, New Hampshire. I did a lot of digging and have sourced WMUR, ABC News, Cold Case New England, and Vocal Media. Our thoughts, prayers, and well wishes go out to her family and friends. Someone knows something. It's time to come forward.
Welcome to Invisible Tears. Thank you for joining us today. I am here today with Amanda, and she tells me we have quite the episode today. I have not read about it, or I've heard a little bit about it, but not much. So I'm going to let her take off with it, and then I will jump in with reactions or questions. So good morning, Amanda.
Good morning, Jane. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. How about you?
I'm doing good. Yeah, the case that we're going to cover today is of Kathy Lynn Gloddy. This is an extremely old case, and I know that there are advocates that have actually attended the rallies that we do in Concord, New Hampshire, that are advocating for her to try and actually keep her case in the news, since it is a pretty old one. So let's get into it.
Let's get into it. I'm very eager to hear about this.
Yeah. So Kathy was the youngest of 6 children, and she grew up in small town Franklin, New Hampshire. She lived with her mother, her father, and her 5 siblings, and also her beloved German Shepherd, Tasha. Kathy went to St. Mary's Catholic School in Franklin as an 8th grader in 1971. She was a free-spirited tomboy who absolutely despised her school uniform. She loved to play sports. She spent time with her friends, had tons of friends, had a great sense of humor and loved to joke around. But she also had a less visible, sensitive side and loved to write poetry. So that's just a little bit to acclimate us about like who Kathy was. So 13-year-old Kathy was last seen by her family on Sunday, November 21st, 1971. It was earlier in the evening, and she told her older sister, Janet, that she was going to go to the local neighborhood store called Bell's Variety to get ice cream and potato sticks, which were some of her favorite snacks. She lived on East High Street in Franklin, and she also took the family German Shepherd, Tasha, with her. Her older sister, in one of the articles that I read, her older sister was like, it wasn't dark yet. It's right down the street. Thought nothing of it. She took the dog too.
How old was she?
She was 13.
13 at the time. Okay.
Yep. So a short while later, only Tasha made it back to their house on High Street. When she got to the house, she was in distress. She was scratching, she was whining, she was whimpering, and she wouldn't sit still. She was searching around the house for Kathy. So her family knew that something happened, something wasn't right. So basically, immediately, Kathy's father and one of her sisters spent time driving around the neighborhood looking for her. Now, remember, it's November 21st, early evening. It's cold, and there was snow in the forecast. So they had no clue where she could have gone or where she would have taken off to. Kathy's mother, Lucille, contacted authorities to report her daughter missing roughly around 11 p.m. that night. And now one of the articles that I looked up, it said that the police told her mom that she had to wait the 24-hour period for a missing person. That was only one, I know. That was only one of the accounts. Another one of the accounts in a separate newspaper actually said that the police immediately took notice, actually contacted the state police within an hour, and then immediately notified the neighboring jurisdictions of Kathy's disappearance. I mean, given her age, given the time of year, and with snow in the forecast too, like it was cold. Kathy was 5'2". She had brown hair and weighed about 97 pounds, last seen wearing a light blue ski jacket and blue pants. She wasn't found that night or the next morning. At 1 p.m., on Monday, so the next day, 63-year-old Alfred Mondor was in a wooded area off of Webster Street, which is now called Chance Pond. It's on a road that actually leads to the town dump. It's approximately 3 miles from the store where Kathy was last seen and was last going to. He came upon what he believed from a distance to be a dead animal. Lots of hunters in the area. As he got closer, though, he realized that wasn't the case at all. He realized it was a young girl who had been savagely beaten and left in the snow, wearing just her knee-high socks.
Ugh.
Yep. The man ran home and immediately called his son-in-law, Alphonse Cody, and asked him to call the police. He was definitely in shock. He was panicked. He was like, what do I do? That's why he didn't call the police directly. So authorities showed up to his home. The officers accompanied him and his son-in-law back to the scene. Shortly thereafter, the Gloddy family was notified later on that afternoon. I know. Super close to Thanksgiving, too, right before the holidays. Horrible. So Kathy's autopsy was performed at Franklin Hospital by criminal pathologist Dr. George Patsis of Boston University, and the results of his findings were absolutely horrible. She had suffered blunt injuries to her head, neck, and abdomen. She had been beaten with an instrument that could not conclusively be identified. The attack was vicious. Her bladder had been split open, her liver was ruptured, and she had been raped at least once. A considerable amount of semen was present on her body, and there were hand marks around Kathy's neck and other parts of her body. So she had been strangled as well. It was also further noted that there were a number of fractured ribs, and she had a fractured skull. She had also been run over by a vehicle numerous times. Oh. Yeah.
Wow.
I know. As I can hear my voice quivering because I'm getting emotional reading her injuries. It's a 13-year-old little girl, and it was savage.
It's almost like overkill.
Yeah.
Or personal.
Exactly. That's exactly what I thought too. It was also noted that she had defensive wounds over much of her body.
So she fought.
She fought, and she fought hard. The AG of New Hampshire at the time, his name was Warren Rudman. He told reporters that, and this is a direct quote, there's evidence that all of these injuries were serious and that any one of them could have been fatal. So definitely overkill here. So while the first hours of the investigation into Kathy's disappearance were handled well, the next couple of days weren't. And I'll get into it because I can see your face. So as soon as Kathy was found, the police started interviewing the people that she knew very quickly. Obviously, that's what they're supposed to do. But they didn't process the scene.
What?
They didn't process the scene. They didn't process the scene for 2 days.
In the middle of winter for 2 days.
Yes, ma'am. So I know it's heartbreaking and it's frustrating. So processing of the scene didn't happen until November 24th. So by that time, snowdrifts and wind had made anything hard to collect. Basically, there were tire mark casts that were done, but by that time they were faint.
Yeah.
So it's almost like useless. A hat belonging to Kathy was actually recovered as well. And an empty potato stick can was recovered.
So she did get her potato sticks.
She did get her potato sticks.
Oh.
Yeah. Fingerprints were also lifted, but they didn't belong to Kathy, and they couldn't identify who they belonged to, which is really...
Where did they lift the fingerprints from?
That I couldn't actually figure out. I'm assuming that the fingerprints were on her, but I couldn't find the exact... Yeah, exactly. So that was just kind of like a side note, and I was like, well, where were those fingerprints? Were they on her? Were they on like the potato stick can? Were they on her hat? Like, but it couldn't find a definitive indicator of where they were. So, yeah, super frustrating. They didn't process the scene for 2 whole days. So, Kathy's funeral was Friday, November 26th, 1971, and it was a closed casket.
Mhm.
More than 300 people attended the funeral. Many of them were,
Wow.
yeah, especially for such a small town.
Yeah.
Many of them were Kathy's St. Mary's junior high school classmates.
Do we know the population in Franklin?
Let's look it up real quick. Oh, definitely bigger than I thought.
Really?
So even though it was definitely a small town, I was definitely thinking that Franklin was probably a little bit more of like the like current size of like Nelson or like something like that. But there's no exact data for 1971, but in 1970, the population of Franklin, New Hampshire was 7,292 people.
That's still small.
That is still small.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's small.
Yep. 2020 census, the population was about 8,700. So, yeah, still definitely a small town. I'm surprised it was actually that big. When I was reading all the articles and everything, I definitely got the feel that it was like smaller, super small.
So that's quite a few people to attend her funeral for that small of a community. Wow.
Yes, it is. There was also a distinct police presence too at the funeral because they naturally thought that she may have known her killer and he might actually be local to the area and would actually show up. So they were definitely observing the crowd and paying attention to anybody acting strangely, but no one stood out. So that piece didn't go anywhere. Sister Victorine, the principal of St. Mary's, where she went to school, actually told police that she was sure that Kathy would never have agreed to ride with a stranger on her own. And she definitely told them if she got into a car with her killer, she either knew them or was taken by force. A classmate of Kathy's, Leo Cody, and he actually has a couple of quotes in here. He told reporters that there was a lot of talk around who could have actually killed Kathy. And everybody basically, like him and classmates and everybody, basically came to the conclusion that it had to have been adults because she could have dealt with any kid around.
Oh, so she was toughy.
Yep. So if you're remembering earlier, as I was sort of explaining her personality, definitely a tomboy, loved to play sports. It definitely sounded like she was super tough. So all of her classmates were like, she had to have been overpowered and it had to have been adults. That's the only thing that actually makes sense.
No.
Yep. So like a month later after Kathy was killed, there still weren't any solid leads. Franklin police chief at the time, James Noel, said that some local businessmen started offering rewards for information to sort of lead to arrests and convictions. They did this in hopes of helping them try to get more tips. It was definitely stirred up the town. In further months following Kathy's murder, the Attorney General Rudman for the state of New Hampshire was still hopeful that the killer would be caught, and he was actually quoted in saying that the case has been moving forward steadily since the start, and they're looking at new information, but there were no suspects and there are no arrests. He also said that the case was being worked on by state, county, and local agencies all together, and he was pretty positive that they would solve it. And that type of messaging continued for several months with no arrests, no suspects.
Oh, how many times have we heard that?
I know. It's like the standard messaging. So I guess it even existed in the early 70s in New Hampshire.
So for 50 years, they've been saying these same statements.
Yep.
Wow.
Yep. So by 1973, so a couple of years later, Kathy's case was like no longer in the news. The investigation had really stopped. And over the course of like the next 10 years after that, there would be periodic times where it would be opened again and closed, opened again and closed, but like nobody was arrested. So it was interesting. It was almost like, oh, information. So they're going to publicly say that they're opening it, but then nothing
Yeah.
would happen, so they would close it. And
That's
then
what they do.
yeah,
If you send in wanting information on the case, if the case is closed or not moving forward, they have to give you information on that case. But as soon as they turn that case into an active case, you don't get any information on that case.
that's a great point. I forgot about that. And that's exactly what
Exact-
that messaging outlines, right?
Yep, it sure does.
Yep. So you're going to love this. In 1983, the case was looked at again by some new investigators and a forensic psychologist, John Philpin.
I was gonna say, I bet John Philpin had something to do with it.
Yep. So he looked at the case and he helped them by making a profile. It was interesting because it didn't sound like any of the local investigators had ever used a psychologist before, but they absolutely loved the experience. And their feedback was like, he helped us so much. The Franklin police sergeant, Michael Chesney, at the time said that he actually gave them new leads. But in his profile was absolutely great. He went as far as telling reporters that the police knew who the suspect was, but didn't really have enough tangible proof to charge him. And that this person fit Philpin's profile. He hit 25 items out of his 26 points.
Wow.
Yeah. So, but obviously he refused to give any sort of information about the identity of the suspect.
Yeah.
He doesn't have any proof to charge him. So, alluding to potential suspects, just a couple of interesting pieces of information that I wanted to touch on too before we actually get into those guys was so the forensic anthropologist who did Kathy's autopsy in 1971, if you remember when I was reading, what she had found, there was a lot of sperm present during the
Yes.
autopsy. No sample was ever taken.
What?
Yep. So
They did not
yep. Yep.
keep.
Go ahead, Jane.
No. How about articles, clothing articles? Like, I mean, did they find her coat? Did they find her pants? Because they found her with just socks on
Correct.
and her hat.
Yep. With just socks on and her hat. I do not know if they ever found her clothes. I didn't find it in any of the articles that I was looking at, so I'm not sure that they actually ever found her clothes.
And they never saved a sperm culture that was found on her.
Nope.
Mind blowing.
Absolutely.
Mind blowing.
Absolutely mind blowing. So, you know what eventually police had to do? Ask her family for permission to exhume her body to try and collect a sample. But they didn't do it until July of 2006. And it was too badly degraded to get anything.
Really?
Yes. So that's like gut-wrenching, right?
So not only did the family have to go through having her body exhumed.
Yep.
It's almost like they did it for nothing because they weren't able to get any DNA.
Right.
Wow. Oh my God, my heart, I can't even imagine what that family must have been going through.
I can't either.
I just can't. I can't.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my gosh.
I mean, at least the police actually asked permission. I am actually pretty sure by law they have to. So that's probably why they did it.
Yeah.
But yeah. It's so gut-wrenching that it's almost like, why wasn't that realized sooner? So it could have actually been done sooner. So possibly they could have.
Because the DNA could have broke the case.
Yep.
The DNA could have made an arrest.
Yep.
Son of a gun.
Yeah.
I'm trying to process. I mean, these are professionals.
I know.
This is their job.
Mm-hmm.
Their job. I mean, not only did it take them 2 days to go back and process the scene of where she was found.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, nothing really came about that because the tire tracks were too degraded. Then they go in, they do not keep a sample of the sperm for
Yeah.
DNA purposes, which I can understand back then.
Mhm.
They don't, they didn't know DNA,
Right.
but
Right.
still, you keep that, you keep as much evidence as possible.
Right.
It
It's still
may not mean nothing to them then, but
mm,
who knows what it means to them down the road. Wow.
right. Right.
Wow.
I
I'm
know.
just wow.
Yep. I told you were going to have a lot to say about this case.
You
I didn't need to get into
know,
it.
I wish I could say I'm surprised,
I know.
and I'm not surprised by hearing this information because of everything that we have found out of what New Hampshire authorities have done over the years or what they haven't done over the years.
Right.
I wish I could, this, would surprise me, but it doesn't.
Mhm.
It disappoints me and it angers me
Yeah.
tremendously.
I
Wow.
know. I know. So that was an important piece to note about her case. The next piece I want to note about her case was that Kathy's brother, Roger, had told press, obviously, earlier on, like right after Kathy's death, that he never thought that Kathy had actually been killed by just one person, that he knew that it was more than one person who took part in it and it was part of a cover up. I thought those quotes were very interesting. Some of them were direct quotes by him. Like he was very fired up. He was like, this is a cover up. It's more than one person. People know who did this. Basically, it's bullshit, right? And it's like, okay. And then another piece that's interesting to note before we get into any of the further suspects was, or any of the suspects, I should say, is that Leo Cody again, her classmate, actually ended up telling reporters in Franklin that there were actually a lot of sketchy people living there in Franklin in 1971. And this is a direct quote from him. He actually said, in those days, Franklin was nothing but a porn for hire. So again, not just like sketchy drugs, but it definitely sounded as if seedy activity, possibly pedophile trafficking, like that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And he said, because of that, I can't fully blame the police for not being able to solve this. 100 other people could have also done it. She, talking about Kathy, knew a lot of them. And that's the issue. So again, that sort of piece of information was like, okay, well, it seems as if there was a known problem. And if that came from one of her classmates, she's in 8th grade, she was 13, it had to have been a pretty known problem amongst that group, right? As I kept on digging, it seemed to me that there were in multiple articles from multiple sources, and many of the people wanted to remain anonymous, but there were definitely talks about an abuse ring in that town and even some police officers being involved with it. So it was pedophiles and
With
corruption.
what?
A police officer being involved with it.
But what did you call it? An abuse ring?
An abuse ring, right? So basically, it was like there were talks that kind of like Leo like alluded to, like there were a lot of sketchy people here. They were doing a lot of bad things. She knew them, and it
Mm.
could have been like one of like 100 people. So it kind of sounded almost like it was known that during that time in Franklin, there were quite a few individuals who were probably pedophiles
Yeah.
and were probably working in some sort of network. And it was rumored that the police knew.
I wouldn't be surprised.
Yep.
I would
Yeah.
not be surprised at all.
Yep.
She had a big family too.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So, I
5
mean,
siblings.
could have been friends of her siblings or family
Right.
members of friends of her siblings.
Yep.
Having a big family like that in a fairly small town like Franklin, you pretty much know everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Or you know somebody that knows somebody that knows somebody.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you have any questions before I start getting into that? There's two separate main suspects that have emerged in this case, and I have a slew of detail on both of them that I can go over. But do you have any questions before we go
Uh,
on?
no, it's kind of interesting. When her brother says that he believes there was more than one,
Mhm,
which had they collected sperm samples,
mhm.
they would know if there was more than one.
Right.
Um, but yeah, that was an interesting
Mhm.
uh, comment
Yes.
made.
Yep. I thought so too. All right. So, first suspect that we're going to talk about is Kenneth Bonenfant. I can't say his name right, I don't think. In 1971, I'm just going to call him Kenneth since I have such a problem
Okay.
saying his last name. He had recently come back from the Vietnam War. He was a decorated war hero and he found work in Franklin as a door to door cigarette salesman. He was well known and respected throughout the community because of his decorated war hero status. And he was friends with law enforcement and town officials and would eventually go on to serve on the city council himself in Franklin.
Interesting.
Mhm. So, on the night of Kathy's murder, Kenneth told police that he was actually going door to door, handing out campaign flyers for former Mayor Gene Daniel. So, he was doing some political stuff. He said that he was in the area of River, Elkin, and Franklin Streets, which are a full 2 miles from where Kathy was last seen, where Kathy lived, and where the store was. He said he knew nothing about Kathy. Nothing was odd about that night. And he basically had nothing to do with it. But the interesting piece is that a witness actually ended up coming forward, telling a much different story about Kenneth and what he did that night. On the night of Kathy's disappearance and murder, Grace Dodge received a call from Kenneth. Basically, Kenneth said that he was in a bind and he needed to spend the night at their house because his boiler wasn't working and he had no heat. So Grace lived with her boyfriend David at the time. Apparently they were all friends. And she said, "Yeah, you can stay at our home," but they lived in Laconia. So after that phone call, Kenneth didn't arrive up to Laconia for about an hour and a half. Apparently the normal drive is about 30 minutes. And when he showed up, he was like disheveled. He was sweating profusely, talking in circles. He was agitated. He also brought with him a 6-pack of beer, which was rare because he apparently rarely drank. And so when they asked him why he was so upset and like what was going on, he stated that he had been having sex with a woman when she began to freak out, but very quickly changed the subject and just asked Grace for an alarm clock because he had to be up super early in the morning. He had to be up at 6 in the morning. So she was like, "Okay, that's just weird. He's having a weird night." So she gave him the alarm clock, set the time for him, and everyone went to bed. Just a couple of hours after they all went to bed, Grace and her boyfriend actually woke up to the sound of the alarm clock and they heard Kenneth in the house, assuming he was getting ready and stuff. They got up thinking that it was 6 o'clock, but then realized it was 2:30 a.m.
Well,
So, yeah, odd. The following afternoon just ended up getting more odd. Kenneth asked them again if he could stay at their house. And they were like, "Well, okay." But even further odd things happened. He kept on asking for more favors. He asked them to drive him back to his house so he could get some clothes and some personal things. And when Grace and her boyfriend asked him, "Well, where's your car?" He said that he had actually hit a deer and the car was a mess. He said that he had actually put the deer in his trunk. So he needed to replace all the carpeting and his tires were all messed up too. So
suspicious.
super suspicious. The couple was like, "This is freaking weird. Like, this is strange. Why hadn't he actually said that before too?" Right. So they're just like, "Okay, this is odd. Sure. Let's get you to your home to pick up some things." In the middle of that trip, he actually asked them to go pick up his estranged wife, Brenda. And they're like, this doesn't make any sense. You guys don't get along. Something was just super, super off, but they complied. And then when Brenda got in the vehicle, it was super uncomfortable. They had turned on the radio. They were trying to act like they weren't listening to them, but they were like having like pieces of like hushed conversation. And Grace actually heard Brenda say that Kenneth was the last person to see Kathy alive.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Sounds like a really good suspect to me.
Yes. So definitely feelers are all up. People are like, what the hell is going on? This is super, super weird. They get to Kenneth's house, all of them, and they go into Kenneth's house. And just minutes after they get there, Kenneth received a phone call and he ran down into the basement. You're like, okay. While he was gone, Brenda actually pleaded with Grace and David and said, please don't leave him alone with me. He's tried to kill me before. He tried to strangle me. And before they had any sort of chance to respond to her, he came up from the basement. Such a weird series of events. And it's such a detailed story too, where I'm like, this is so weird.
Like super detailed.
Right? So he came up from the basement, uttered some weird stuff, went back down into the basement. So they're like, what is he doing? So he was carrying a large box of items out of the basement, like through the bulkhead. It looked like it was like tools, a lug wrench, rags, some records. It was really weird. When they tried to go down into the basement to ask him like if he was okay or like what he was doing, he screamed at everybody to go back upstairs. And then once he finally got back upstairs, he was like, okay, I'm ready to go. And Grace was like, well, what about your clothes that you needed and your personal stuff? And he was like, oh, I had completely forgotten, and ran upstairs. So end of odd, weird story. I'm assuming that Grace and David were so uncomfortable with the fact, because it doesn't actually get into like any more like odd situation. I'm assuming that Grace and David were like, you know, there's something weird going on, but like you can't stay here. Right.
Yeah,
they're just
exactly.
like red flags. So basically, Grace said like in the following days, it became like increasingly clear that like police were following Kenneth around. Grace was actually interviewed by investigators, and she told them everything, that like this whole story. She gave them all of that detail. The police had actually told her that they were receiving information from other sources as well. So like she wasn't the only person saying all these weird things and, you know, transaction of events. Apparently the carpeting in the trunk of Kenneth's car had been replaced, and all 4 of his tires were replaced as well. The mechanic was interviewed by investigators too, and he said that the mechanic advised Kenneth to keep them because by his assessment, he was like, they're perfectly good and functional. I don't know why you want me to change them. But Kenneth was adamant that the mechanic throw them away. So the police ended up getting them. Authorities obtained a search warrant for the vehicle and combed through it meticulously. When it was up on a lift, they also discovered that some additional work had been done to the muffler. There was some sort of question about the saddle clamp bolts that and the depth of the nuts. They weren't like, it didn't exactly look like they went. And it was also reported that Kathy had some weird puncture wounds on her arms. So they were trying to do some exact calculation about like the distance of the bolts and stuff like that and matched up to Kathy's body. Sort of inconclusive, but it was an interesting piece of information that they found. The only thing...
They did something.
Right?
Sorry.
The only other thing that they found in his car was the tiniest piece of evidence, and it was a singular potato stick that was left in the trunk.
Really?
Yes. Yep. So as mounds, so like, you know, they're questioning people, they're coming through his car. So evidence against Kenneth is definitely like piling up. He was brought in for questioning multiple times.
Lie detector test?
I didn't see anything about a lie detector test, but here's an interesting and very frustrating piece of information.
Yeah, here we go.
Frankly, there's actually quite a few in regards to the suspect. So Franklin detectives said that they're like really diligently working on Kathy's case, but as he was being brought in for questioning multiple times, it was clear that he was being fed information from a leak. Like he already knew information before they were asking it of him. And they're like, how the hell is this happening? Okay, who is he friends with? In pop in an officer named Robert Magoon. He was friends with Kenneth, and he didn't have the best reputation. He was, by all accounts, many witnesses said that he was dirty. Like he was a dirty cop. So what they actually did in Franklin was they actually fed some information to Robert Magoon, to the officer, like incorrect information, to see if it
Yeah.
would take it back. And sure enough, it did.
Really?
Yep. So Magoon, he definitely unraveled the investigation by doing that.
Okay, not to say not to distract,
Mhm.
but my lights just blinked twice. My lights just went off and on twice.
Really?
Yep.
Interesting.
Just a little heads up.
Thank you.
Not that it means anything, but I thought I'd let you know because you would know.
Thank you. I'll start tuning into it. All of a sudden, if I just start staring off into space, don't worry.
I'll
I'm just
know.
receiving message.
I'll know. Yeah.
So the super frustrating piece about this was Robert Magoon. So he was reprimanded because they could prove that he was feeding him information, but he wasn't suspended. He wasn't fired. He was just like, it was like a slap on the wrist. Like, don't do that. And like nothing else happened to him.
Wow.
So with all that being said, if we fast forward to 1983, there was a grand jury that was set to indict Kenneth for Kathy's murder, but the attorney general refused to proceed with the prosecution of the case. He claimed that he wasn't wholly confident that he could secure a conviction, and that Kenneth's friends that were being called to testify against him weren't going to actually oppose him. They were going to actually lie on the stand. Surprisingly, remember the story from Grace?
Yeah.
The odd story from Grace, and she was originally interviewed by investigators.
Yeah.
Right? Grace was never asked to testify.
She was never asked to testify.
Yep. Yeah.
So it never went to the grand jury.
Correct. Yep.
But they say because of the witnesses might have recanted their statements.
Mm-hmm. The AG said, I'm not confident I'll get an actual conviction. So he wouldn't prosecute.
But she was never asked to testify.
Yep. Grace was never asked. Yep.
The one that had the most credible information.
Yeah.
Pretty much, let's just say the confession.
Right.
Heard the confession.
Right.
And yeah, they never asked her to testify, and it never got brought to grand jury.
Correct. Yep. Yeah. Crazy, right? And so it's like, I knew you were going to have such a field day with this story. And so it's like, why?
What is it's got to be a cover up somehow.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody's covering for somebody. Well,
yeah.
And it's like, it's almost like Kenneth is saying, I have dirt on you, and I have dirt on you, and I have dirt on you. You go forward with this, and all this dirt is going to be revealed.
Right.
That's what it sounds like to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It really seems like it's a very odd, twisted, corrupt situation in this town.
Yeah.
And I guess possibly more people are connected in more ways than we know. And I don't know, because so many of these pieces, it just doesn't make sense. I do not know why Grace was never asked to actually testify, because with all that information that she had, and then with possibly other things that the cops had, it just do away with Kenneth's friends then. If you think that they're going to perjure themselves.
No.
It's baffling. But that's not the only story that I have about Kenneth.
I'd like to say, oh, I'm surprised by that. But
I know, right?
I'm really not.
I know, right? We'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsors. And now back to our episode. So, this is actually a story that came from one of Kathy's friends, and it didn't come until much later on and after the fact. Her name was Jane. She came forward and she actually said, and I do not believe, I couldn't actually see and hear that it was actually to like the police that she came forward to. I think it was actually ended up being an investigator that she ended up coming forward to. Jane said that the evening of Kathy's murder, her and her friend were meeting up because they were actually planning to run away because they couldn't take the abuse anymore that they were being subjected to by a couple of men that they just could not get away from. These men were Kenneth Bonenfant and one of his friends that he had served in Vietnam with. So that night they met up, they're planning to get away. They were spotted in town by these two men. They tried to escape from them by running into the woods. They weren't fast enough, they were cornered. They were brought back to a small residence in Franklin that was definitely used for questionable activities. Jane was taken upstairs by Kenneth's accomplice, and Kathy remained with Kenneth on the first floor. A little bit later, Jane heard Kathy screaming. She got away from her own attacker, darted downstairs to find her friend on the ground. She said that Kathy had been hit with something described as like a wooden club with a large knot at the end of it. Jane said that she grabbed the club and ran out of the residence. But beyond all of this, she says that the account of the night in question, like all goes blank. Like she's tried everything to try and actually pull up more details, like what ended up actually happening to her. I mean, obviously she ended up surviving. So I don't know if seeing the sight of her friend Kathy just shut down her brain, possibly. So she said she's tried everything to try and actually, jog up any more pieces and bits of information. She said that as the years went by, she lived in paralyzing fear and was abused by these men and she remained in the area for decades and was consistently, she didn't say like harassed, but she was reminded of their presence. They would periodically pop into like her job and just like let her know that they were like still there, like watching her and they were around. Just kind of like it sounded like a fear tactic.
Yep.
Yeah, she said all the threats got so real. She unfortunately had to as she got older, she ended up marrying and having a family. Unfortunately, she had to bury one of her children because of a heart attack. Her child had a heart attack, and it kind of even showed up to the funeral, so she couldn't even grieve.
Oh my God.
Yeah, I was like, I felt so bad for this woman.
What a POS.
Mm-hmm. She was so scared that she began just carrying a firearm around everywhere to give herself safety. And that's the end of Jane's story about that. That story blew my mind. I was like, oh my goodness. And just to understand, well, there are pieces of the story, like obviously she can't remember some pretty important pieces, like towards the end. I understand how your mind can shut down during extremely traumatic situations and stuff like that. So that was a piece of a story that somebody brought forward. But yeah, it wasn't brought forward until much later after the fact. So nothing ever actually ended up happening with Kenneth. He was never formally charged, right? The AG wouldn't go forward with it. They didn't think they had a solid enough case. And he ended up passing away in July of 2020, and his obituary read like that of an extremely decorated and upstanding citizen with all sorts of accolades and awards and all sorts of things.
Wow.
Yeah, that's number one. That's the first suspect. Any questions about Kenneth?
I don't know what to say, but I don't even know where to begin. Like, I'm obviously people knew.
Yeah.
People knew what kind of person he was or freaking monster he was. People knew his activities. I'm sure. I'm almost. I can't imagine that Jane and Kathy were the first or only two that they harassed.
Mm-hmm.
There had to be others,
Mm-hmm.
or even attempting to harass and abuse others. There had
Right.
to be.
Right. And now her classmates' comment, Leo's comment, and her brother's comment is sort of interesting. It's almost like it's kind of like helping to fill those pieces in together, right? Like
Yeah,
the classmates' comment about like, oh, there's just a lot of sketchy people in this town, and like she knew them all, and then like her brother, like there were multiple people, and I know it's a cover up, and so some of these comments that would seem like so like out there are starting to make a little bit more sense.
absolutely.
The
Yeah,
further we dig in.
definitely.
So I guess we'll never know about Kenneth. It's all signs definitely point to him. But the next suspect that consistently came up in Kathy's case, his name was Edward Duquette. He was a violent pedophile. His nickname in Franklin was he was called Filthy McNasty.
Ugh.
Yep. And when Franklin investigators sat down with Kathy's sister, Karen, to discuss Edward, they realized that Karen had actually been molested by Edward one day when she was babysitting for his son. He had, for a short period of time, lived right above them in an apartment. Mm-hmm. Before the situation could escalate into anything further, she was able to escape, didn't babysit again, and she never spoke of the incident again until that interview that they did with her in 1983. So she never told anybody, or at least she never told any adults or any investigators or anything. And as police looked into Edward, they realized that he actually had a record. Edward was living in Gardenia, California in July of 1971. And during that time, he lured a 14-year-old girl to his home with the promise of a babysitting job. And once she got there, he repeatedly beat and raped her for hours until she could escape. Knowing that she escaped and could identify him, he fled to New Hampshire. Kathy ended up being murdered in November of that year. Right after Kathy's murder, Duquette actually moved to Louisiana and then to Texas, where he was actually arrested and extradited back to California for the crime of that other 14-year-old girl in California. He served a 5-year sentence in California's prison system starting in 1973. So even though he had a record and it was clear that he had actually molested Kathy's sister, lived right above them for a period of time, investigators could not actually link Edward to the homicide, to Kathy's murder in any real capacity, though. They didn't have any other type of evidence at the time. But then you fast forward to March of 2006. Edward himself goes into Dixie County Jail in Cross City, Florida, and announces that he needed to confess to his involvement in a murder of a New Hampshire girl with the last name of Gloddy. So he's confessing. They're like, okay. It was clear he was older. He was in failing health. They could tell. So it was almost like, oh, is this sort of like a get this off my conscience before I die sort of thing. Once investigators sat down with him, it was super clear that stuff was wrong. So the second after he said this, they looked up the case, saw the case was open, pulled up just like the snippets of police information that they could have. So they had details about the case. What Edward described about the day with Kathy didn't add up at all. He said that he and Kathy, he had taken her fishing. They had engaged in mutual relations. And then he just remembers Kathy leaving his truck and the sight of her dead body in the water. He got scared, so he moved her body someplace and buried it in Franklin. So
that just sounds like a fantasy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So Kathy didn't drown. There was no sign she had ever been submerged in water. She had never been buried either. And plus, on November 21st, it was like 28 degrees in Franklin. Nobody's fishing.
Yeah.
Um, so as they tried to like clarify, and he could tell like they weren't like believing him, he just got more and more confused and essentially irate. But regardless, those police officers contacted New Hampshire. It took them 3 months to get down there to question him.
Okay. Yeah, this is a murder case, an unsolved murder case, but we'll get there when we get there.
Yeah, he walked
What the hell?
He walked into the police department in March of 2006, and they didn't get down there to question him until June. So I guess they were busy.
Busy
Yeah.
solving cases. Not.
No.
Not. I almost guarantee they didn't solve one single case in that 3 months. Oh my gosh.
I know. I know.
Really?
So basically, they ended up questioning him. It was brief, it was nonchalant, and Edward himself ended the meeting and was like, okay, he must have just assumed, he was like, this is useless. They scheduled a follow-up interview for the next day. He didn't show. And then when police finally got him on the phone again, he just recanted his confession and said that he was done talking. So some people think that, his years of like alcohol and drug abuse confused, and recent like health problems, like fueled a false confession. But they also think that, obviously he was in failing health. Maybe he was recounting a separate crime that he was involved with and got the name mixed up.
That did cross my mind. Definitely did cross my mind. But did they try to maybe connect his information to another case?
It doesn't, none of the articles said that investigators tried to do that, but with the specifics that he brought up, I would be inclined as an investigator to look into it, because he was also on the run initially too. So, I mean, were there possibly other cases like that in California, Texas, Louisiana, or Florida?
Yeah.
Possibly. And possibly his mind was just getting confused because, he was ill and basically at end of life. So,
yeah.
It'd be something to look into. I couldn't find any traction on whether or not they've actually looked into that.
If I was a private investigator, I would devote like a year into that, looking into all that. See exactly who was he talking about. If he was if it wasn't a fantasy and it was a confession, a true confession on what he did, who was it?
Right.
Where?
Right.
And with the details that he come up with, those are pretty, I mean, in the winter. Okay. So in the winter, he was fishing.
Right.
So I'm thinking not New Hampshire, but he went where? To Louisiana and then Texas?
Yep.
So there's lots of fishing down there.
And it is
in November.
In November.
In November. So I would so totally focus on those two spots on what his confession was all about.
Yeah.
Or if it was confession and not a fantasy.
Right. I also don't have any exact details on when he ended up going to, at some point he ended up going to Florida too, because the place where he went in and confessed was in Florida. So,
but that was after he served his time in California.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah. So, yeah.
So I totally would not connect him with Kathy Gloddy's case. I would eliminate him. But as you were talking about some of the stuff in the confession and stuff, I was thinking, whoa, did he know Kenneth?
Right. I don't know.
Did he know Kenneth?
I don't know.
Or obviously there's been talk about maybe two attackers. And I understand Kenneth had that other friend, but maybe he
was that other friend.
And just got confused. Well, okay, I'm going to come up with a couple of
Go for it.
a couple of. Okay, one, he could possibly be talking about killing somebody else.
Yep.
Okay, someplace else. Two, doesn't necessarily exclude that maybe he knew Kenneth and maybe he was a part of Kathy Gloddy's, but he was just confused with which one he was talking about. Because there may have been a couple. He may have killed or been involved with killing a couple of girls, which I wouldn't be surprised because obviously he's, a child molester. I mean, today he would be a registered sex offender. They don't stop.
Right.
So there could have been more. So he could have been talking about killing somebody. The description of that confession could have been talking about somebody in Louisiana or Texas. But in reality, he also could have had something to do with the Gloddy case with Kenneth.
Yep.
So there's two possibilities
Yep.
in my mind.
Yeah.
But I'm not a detective and I'm not a police officer and I'm not a private investigator and I'm not even an investigative journalist. That's just my opinion, my own sole opinion.
We're not investigative journalists yet.
No, we are not.
We're trying.
But we're very opinionated.
We definitely are. We definitely are. And we try our best to do like our due diligence, with studying where things come from and making sure that we, dig into things
we try to be factual.
Yeah.
We definitely try to be factual and try to, talk about facts and truth.
Yes, absolutely. So
do you have more?
Yep.
Here we go.
Yes. So
it's the never ending case.
I know. I don't have anything more for suspects. Those are essentially the two main suspects that have always been brought up. But there is like further interesting information. So I guess in summary about like Ed, specific to Ed, we don't know, but I think that it wouldn't be wasted time for somebody that was interested in this case to do a little bit of digging and possibly where he was living during those times to see if possibly this confession was tied to another case.
Yeah, exactly.
If it wasn't some sort of, fantasy, like you were saying. If we fast forward a little bit to 2009, Kathy's older sister, Janet, started advocating for her, got new eyes on the case, actually reached out to some private investigators who ended up, being able to or agreeing to help her pro bono with Kathy's case. And Kathy's case actually ended up being covered on 2020.
Really?
Yep. So it got national attention. So good job, Janet. Go you.
Good job. Yes.
This actually ended up making big enough waves that Kenneth himself contacted the Concord Monitor in his own defense. Right?
Of course, if you're innocent, of course you would do that. Wrong.
He actually ended up so what he said was he actually contacted them the day before the program was actually set to air. And he just wanted to reiterate that he had nothing to do with Kathy's murder. And for the first time, he actually claimed that he didn't even know her. It was clear he was just extremely brazen, arrogant. He went on to say that if he were guilty, why would he remain in the area all those years? Further touted all the different positions he had held in town, made references to charity work, and simply just said that he felt sorry for the Gloddy family.
I'm sure he did. Yeah. Having a positive presence in your community means that you're not a bad person, that there's no way you could murder someone. Come on now.
I know.
Come on.
I know. It was actually it appeared as if some of the information and some of the things he was actually saying to the Concord Monitor, they were very like taken back at how arrogant he was. They're like, okay, all right. So yep, I went over it when Kenneth actually ended up passing away back in he ended up passing away in 2020. So Kenneth and Edward, definitely the two main suspects in that case. Obviously there's a ton more information about one than the other.
I have one question.
Yeah.
The infamous fingerprint.
Yeah. I only found one mention of it in one article, just saying
That's
that it
it?
wasn't, yep, just saying that it wasn't Kathy's and they couldn't actually link it to a suspect. Isn't that weird? They couldn't link it to anybody. So I wonder if did they ever run it against?
Did they ever run it? Yeah. I mean, if they ran the fingerprint through CODIS, then Ed would have been excluded right away.
Right.
Because he was in jail. He served time, so they have his fingerprints on file.
Right.
Kenneth would be the one that they would have tried to match the fingerprint up to.
Yep.
And there's no information that they ever did that.
Nope.
So we don't know if they did it or they didn't do it.
Nope. Couldn't find anything on that.
Wow.
I know. I wonder if the private investigators that are working pro bono directly with, Kathy's family, I should say family and advocates, because I'm not sure who is still alive and who is not. I wonder if they've ever found any information on that. It'd be really interesting to hear.
But the thing is Kenneth is no longer alive.
True.
And unless he's ever been arrested, there's no reason for them to have his fingerprints on file.
True.
Unless, did they arrest him when they first decided that they were going to go ahead with the
grand jury, right?
Do they arrest you before you go to the grand jury? Yes.
Yeah, I would assume so. Yeah.
So they had to have arrested him at one point or another and got fingerprints.
Right.
Hmm.
I don't know. Maybe that's why there was never any more mention of that fingerprint in anything else, because maybe it didn't belong to either one of them. Maybe it's still like simply just an unmatched fingerprint.
Maybe it was that other guy that was with Kenneth.
Right.
That we don't know who it was.
Yeah. Yeah. So remember back in the story talking about Robert Magoon, the dirty cop. So another interesting piece of information, because again, taking the quotes from some people within the community. So he was the one that was feeding information to Kenneth. After his retirement from law enforcement, he went to work at the Pines Community Center in Northfield and ended up being arrested and charged with 10 counts of felonious sexual assault and was sentenced to 26 years in prison, where he is now.
He's there now?
Yep.
Wow.
Yeah. So the comments about the corruption and the possible networks and possible police being involved, obviously this doesn't give tangible proof to that, but one can make connections there.
I would definitely suspect him to be another suspect, very strong suspect, especially maybe he was the other one with Kenneth.
Yeah, true. And that's actually and I know, and that's actually the end of the my pieces of information. I only had one other extremely sad fact about the entire situation, and that was that Kathy's mom, Lucille, she didn't just lose Kathy, she ended up losing a son as well, and she ended up committing suicide in 1997. I know. Family's been through so much, and unfortunately, it's been 50 plus years, no justice. So the least we can do is cover Kathy's story and keep her story out there in the hopes that maybe some other pieces and tips and information will come forward and they can do something with it.
Do we know if that prosecutor is still alive?
I do not know.
Mm. Because I would really love more explanation from him
Yeah.
why he chose not to move forward with that. You know,
Yeah.
that seems to be the consensus with the state of New Hampshire. I can name, okay, Tina and Bethany Sinclair.
Mhm.
Everybody knows who killed them, but they feel that because they don't have the bodies, I mean, even the authorities know who killed them, but they claim because they can't find their bodies, they can't move forward with a case. Now, let's not forget Harmony Montgomery.
Right.
They never found her body, but they moved forward with the case, and her father was charged with murder, and he's now incarcerated for her murder. He was found guilty. All right. So he was found guilty by jury.
Yep.
So we know who killed them, but that person still walks. He's never been charged. Then we look at Trish Haynes' case. Everybody knows who killed Trish Haynes. Trish Haynes. Even the authorities know who killed Trish Haynes. Lots of statements have been given, lots of evidence, but still, they have not charged anybody because they claim they don't have enough evidence for a prosecution. And I disagree with that. If you really look into Trish Haynes' case, baffling, totally baffling. And now here's Kathy Gloddy's case.
Mhm.
I mean, honestly, listening to everything, I think there was more that they could have done that they chose not to do to really prove with physical evidence that it was Kenneth.
Yep.
All they had to do was do a little more digging with physical um to find that physical proof. Even I believe they had enough beyond a shadow of a doubt
Mhm.
that he did it,
Yeah.
that he had involvement in it and he did it. Just, I mean, when you look at a case, you're not looking at just one thing. You're looking at all these other little things that add up. The tires, he got rid of the tires. Uh, and why did he get rid of the tires? He got rid of the tires because he was told that there was tire prints in that snow, I
Right.
believe.
He was fed information.
He was fed information. He
Mhm.
got rid of her clothes. He had to have had her clothes because they never found anything but her wearing her socks and her hat. So they
Yes.
had to have he had to have gotten rid of her clothes that morning, that day that Grace was there.
Yeah.
Um, I find it hard to believe that they never kept a sample of the sperm.
Mhm.
I believe that they had to have taken a sample and somebody took it. It's gone.
Mhm.
But
Mhm.
they can't say that, oh, that's missing evidence. Instead, they can say we just never took it. So
Yeah.
there's another cover up.
Yeah. I I'm I'm there with you too because even though sure it was 1971, but with who the autopsy went to go through all the extensive of what happened to her and how thorough that was detailed. I mean, let's face it, even though it was 1971, this was a 13-year-old girl who was brutally
Brutally.
brutalized.
Yeah.
I mean, so it was huge news for the state. So they were going to do this right. I find it extremely hard to believe too that initially no sample like that was actually taken. And you're right, Jane, and it just ended up going missing somehow.
But they can't admit that.
Right.
Yeah, and the brutality of her murder. It was
Ooh,
personal. It
yeah.
was personal and overkill. And I believe that she knew who it was.
Yeah. Yeah, I do too.
And probably, unfortunately, the dog saw the whole thing.
Yeah.
That's why the dog was so freaked out when it got back to the house.
I was like searching for her. Yeah.
Sad. Very, 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 very heart-wrenching and sad. But
Yeah.
also angers me that nobody's been charged.
Hmm.
That whoever did this to her pretty much got away with murder.
Hmm.
Sad.
Yeah.
Family never saw justice.
No, they did not.
Sad.
And so it would be great if any of her advocates, like I said, I know that they're involved with the New Hampshire Coalition of Families for the Missing and Murdered ever since the first rally. I know that they came and helped to speak about her case. I'm not exactly sure who within the family is advocating, but I know that it's like friends as well. So it would be great to be able to connect in directly with them, have them correct any sort of information that maybe I pulled up. If
Yeah.
something isn't right, please fact correct me. And I would also just love to know more about Kathy too.
Kathy, yeah,
So
definitely.
please reach out to us if you have any other information, if you need to fact correct anything, if you want to come on and talk about Kathy. I know that especially with her sister, connecting out to, private investigators and that sort of thing, maybe there is further information that they would like
Yeah,
to get out there publicly as well, where here's a platform for them to be able to do that as well.
exactly. Yes. Yes, we welcome them to come speak with us and talk to us about more about Kathy, more about what's moving forward with her case.
So,
Let's not forget her case is still unsolved. It's
yes.
considered unsolved. It still remains an unsolved case for over 50 years.
Yes.
Yeah. Time for answers.
Yes.
Well, with that, thank you for listening to Invisible Tears. Don't forget to subscribe, follow. We have more content coming up that you might really be interested in. And we thank you for your support and share, share, share. Have a great day.
Thank you all so much for listening to this episode of Invisible Tears. Make sure you subscribe to our podcast to hear all future episodes. Click into our link tree too in the episode description to find and follow us on all our social medias. And it also links to our website, invisible-tears.com, where you can keep current on any events that may be coming up, read more about Jane and the team, and read more about all the Connecticut River Valley unsolved cases. Evil may exist in this world, but we will not let it win. See you next episode.